I get behind impossible goals and okay, this is my impossible goal. And I was like, oh yeah, let's do that. And let's make it like 120. Let's go big. And so he was all in everything, or so he thought. It's like, yeah, no, I eat tuna and salads. It's so you eat mercury, basically. You're killing your brain, right? So it's like we ascribe to these things that are like, oh yeah, low glycemic index, high lean protein, but it's poison.
Welcome back to the DNA of Things. Today, the mic flips. Josh Bowerman, the co-founder and managing director at JB Andrews, is in the host seat, and I am his guest. Now, over the past few months, Josh and his team have been digging into longevity, that is the science, the business, and the human stories. So in this episode, we'll trace my own path from molecular biologist to strategist at the intersection of DNA, behavior, and potential, spanning from athletes, entrepreneurs, and families. So what you can expect in this episode is first principles thinking on healthspan versus lifespan, and why these small trim tab choices compound, and how to build simple, repeatable systems you can actually live with. So no silver bullets here, just practical tools that move the needle. Looking forward to getting your feedback on the conversation.
So for those of you that have been paying attention over the last few months, you'll see that myself and the team at JB Andrews have been exploring the topic of longevity and the science and business landscape behind that. I'm very happy to have Jeremy on with me today. He is not only a molecular biologist, he's an entrepreneur. He was a track athlete in his early years, and overall, he is really a strategist operating at the intersection of genetics, behavior, and potential in both the human and the sort of business world. But Jeremy, I know that's a very brief introduction. I know from our last conversation that you talked about your background in great detail, and I was amazed by the breadth of it. So if you wanted to add anything in terms of an introduction, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks so much for having me, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love what you're doing in terms of stepping out into the frontier of what appears to be an emergent industry, but actually, I think when we dive into it, we'll see that it's been around for a long time. There's just kind of different tools and maybe accessibility, and maybe some instances inaccessibility to some of the tools that we can start to discern and discuss. But just a little more background on me generally. So I think you captured it. Let's say, professionally, I was classically trained as a molecular biologist, biochemist, and what that means is specifically going in through the graduate school route, the academy, you really dive deep into a very narrow topic of study, and I suppose in the process you learn very deeply on the subject matter, but you also, as I reflect on it now, is first principles on how to think. And I guess more profound an outcome of that is really being aware that being able to discern between the paradigm or the map and the landscape. So what I mean by that is in my PhD, I dove really deep into the realm of let's say the molecular ecology of a mobile gene pool. So, take something like what everybody has on the tip of their brains these days, something like COVID or mRNA vaccines. Those are examples of, accelerants of, gene exchange in the environment, whether that be a virus, whether that be the an mRNA type of plasmid. Those are molecular tools that actually nature has invented, and we have co-opted to do, our bidding in some respects. So in my PhD, what I was looking at is, one of these particular mechanisms, the name doesn't matter, but it's called the integron. It was actually a candidate to be the next CRISPR-Cas9, a gene editing technology. So again, another molecular tool. But there are ways to measure, genes that move at accelerated rates through all life effectively. And so then what we see are the emergence of things like that everybody knows about, like multi-drug resistance pathogens or invasive species of bacteria, or bacteria that can bioremediate toxic spills. And so I kind of looked mechanistically at how you can accelerate evolution around those things, or how it is happening naturally. And that brought me into the human microbiome, that I know is a super hot topic these days. definitely dialed into longevity and lifespan, and then how the human microbiome relates to the human genome, because there's this really interesting molecular dance that we can talk about for sure. And so, as I say, I kind of went through that academic frame. I became a professor at the end of my journey, starting at Dalhousie, going to Cornell for my postdoc, and then back to Mount St. Vincent University in Canada. But then I got called into industry. I got presented with this amazing opportunity, which I think is maybe a good jumping off point for us in terms of, longevity and performance, because it was looking at reproductive fertility and, reproductive lifespan as a result. So I was handed these samples, tissue samples from mice that had been selectively bred for 10 years and for reproduction purposes. Who can make the most babies for the longest is basically the challenge. And so my job as a molecular biologist was to come in and say, well, how is this happening at the level of the multi-omics, so DNA, transcriptomics, et cetera. And it was fascinating, because it was the equivalent to these mice had doubled their reproductive lifespan. It's basically like humans having babies until they're in their 80s, 90s. And so it was my job to kind of go in and discern, how it is that that's possible. And so I did. And, that was a fascinating journey in and of itself, but it pointed me to the power of industry. And, with a great academic foundation, I could go in and ask really tough questions and update the maps, update the paradigms that often limit human capability. And so after the work with Performance Genomics, which was the reproductive longevity company, I thought, hey, I want to do my own thing with athletes. And so I started my own and looked into the DNA molecules of, 50,000 athletes, and, started to develop a, first set of first principles insofar as how might athletes maximize their potential in the short term, but also, well, how might they sustain it in the long term? So like, think your Tom Brady's, right? So how long can I perform at my most optimal, my highest?
Yeah.
And then I got really capped, because I had to be an entrepreneur to do this. And I should say that I was a track athlete, as a boxer, as a track athlete. So I was really applying these things to myself. And so then as I moved into the entrepreneurial world, I was like, oh, well, my goal is different, but the principles are kind of more or less the same. So really in the last, so what I just described to you was, a fast forward through, 10-year odyssey of molecular biology. And well, I basically did 10-year in academics and 10-year in industry. And so now in the years most recently, I'm been captured by this idea of like, how do I package this first principles of it and put it into an operating system that works for athletes, works for entrepreneurs, and more recently, even families, both of us being new dads. It's like, okay, well, how do you even bring this home? So that's kind of the broad scope of, where I am now, and generally speaking, how I got here. So yeah, I'll been a bit long-winded, but I think maybe that adds a little bit of context.
It's really good. And I know that we spoke about offline the sort of foundations of some of this being pushing limits. Like you wanted to push the limits of yourself as a track athlete. When you were in school, it was about pushing the limits of yourself in the human mind. And now that kind of has led you to looking at longevity and limits, generally speaking, whether it's in the human being at a molecular level, whether it's looking at sports individual and their career, or whether it's even looking at a business and to your point, families and parenthood and all that good stuff. But is there anything else in your story that's led you to looking at longevity and human systems, just generally speaking?
Well, I mean, I think most personally, and I think everybody that's really deep in this industry probably has a similar story, is you see what happens when you don't have, longevity or, more specifically, let's say, health span through that longevity, because, generally speaking, longevity is the duration or length of an individual's life. Well, okay, if I've, shut down and got early onset Alzheimer's, and I live until I'm 200, I'm not sure that's the quality that we're going after. Right.
Yeah.
So and I think it was David Sinclair that we use the word like Healthspan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why the work with like performance genomics was interesting, because it was reproductive longevity, which is basically how can I grow and contribute in the highest performing way, by the way, I think, is making another life. And I think you're appreciating this now as a dad. And so I think, like, to kind of go back to the thread I started with is, I see or saw what it is like to not have this. Like my mom, for example, she had multiple sclerosis, and that's a multifactorial disease, if you will. So its aspects are genetic, aspects are behavioral, and aspects are environmental, where you happen to be. My father also showing signs now of late onset Alzheimer's, but also risk of things like cardiometabolic health and disease. And so seeing that those things now are like, the health risks are knowable. And if you understand, and if you have access to that information up front, it's a real small adjustment of the rudder, even like the trim tab bit of the rudder. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be this massive swing.
Yeah.
Like literally a few adjustments, barely even a degree or two. But starting at an age where I guess you have enough wherewithal to care. And, I wish that was when I was 18 or 16. And, so, but, it's not too late when you're 30. It's not too late when you're 40. But, the later you wait, the harder it is to turn around a container ship in the harbor, right? And then that's why you got to get the tugboat. And that's what you're seeing is, like, with all this, like the Peter Attias and the Hoovermans, it's like, that's a tugboat to turn the ship around. And it's really expensive. And when you get to a point is not everybody can afford the tugboat, and the collision course is, it's insurmountable. Like my father right now, it's insurmountable. He's 84. There are any changes that he can really make to increase his quality of life to one that would be, most optimal of a possibility. So to me, that's quite tragic to know that outcome has happened, and that people today are unaware of the decisions that they could make to avoid that outcome. And so this information is not really broadly accessible, and certainly the products and services that are readily available are not reinforcing the principles. So that's kind of more at a global scale down to the individual. But then, there's also the thing that really, troubles me is something like, well, what if Einstein didn't have an aneurysm? What if we had 10 more years of Einstein? What might that have looked like? Right.
Yeah.
And so the reason that I've kind of thought about these three pillars is, like the athlete is just because it's like, that's just cool. That's an F1 race car. And it's like, what might humans capable, how high, how fast, how far? Like, that's just, I think we're always going to be interested in that. And that's the pursuit of physical transcendence. We have the Olympics every 4 years. I don't see that going away. And that's just exciting to see that we can update the old models of no pain, no gain to something that is less of a drill sergeant, more of a gardener, and have that be scalable. So having that be scalable, having human capability unleashed at scale, to me is amazing. But then when I think about, the Einstein scenario, there is, well, how many great leaders have left us too soon? Well, Steve Jobs might be another example. Was there something knowable or avoidable there? Because that's a massive ripple effect. And, and then you want to talk about massive ripple effects. Like, I'm not sure that there's anything bigger than the family. I'll tell you, this is a real funny story. And true, because I just had my brother out for visit, and I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Actually, the place where the birthplace of Oswald Avery, who actually proved DNA, the heritable material of life. I mean, Watson Crick get all the credit because of the structure, but it was Oswald Avery who was like, yeah. So family came out, and my brother's like, Nova Scotia, right? It's Maritimes, lobster. It's like, we got to do lobster. You got to do lobster. I'm like, okay, well, sure. Like, couldn't find the great restaurant that he was looking for. He's like, you know what? Let's just do a cookout. right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do a lobster cookout. Like my wife's mother, daughter, a fisherman, lobster fisherman. So we found Gary the lobster guy, and he went out and laid the traps the day before. We got fresh lobster the next day, and but here's the thing: is the night before, I'm like, okay, so what's the plan for this day, this cookout? Because so much can go wrong on it within the family without proper communication. And anyway, we circumnavigated the plan, right? We were all aligned on the goal. Like my brother's like, I don't understand what the big deal is. I was like, well, let's imagine the worst possible thing that could go wrong. What if Brooke falls in the lobster pot? You know what I mean? That's my daughter, right? And it's like, I've never done this before. We've got like 20 people coming over, and there's young boys and girls, and how do we create an environment where we protect it so that there can be play? And anyway, after the fact, my brother's wife, Hannah, she says to me, yeah, Damien's kind of chill. He kind of sits back and kind of lets those things happen. And because nothing's worse than the fallout at a nuclear plant, which is where he works, and he manages crisis there. And I'm like, I'm not so sure that that's true. Have you heard about in Isaac and Ishmael in the fallout of family, right? And have you heard about the conflict in the Middle East? So I think that there is family and family relationship, and knowing ourselves and knowing our origins, knowing our shared origins, knowing that we have this kind of, divine gift that's still unfolding. We don't know what it is. So, again, this is tangential and probably more philosophical than you want. So I'm happy that you're going to be chopping this up for the most relevant parts to your audience. But the fact is, the reason that I think I'm called to do this is because I see what a big deal it is, right?
Yeah.
From the athlete to the entrepreneur to the family is there's an opportunity to optimize Healthspan in all those things. And to me, what that really means is looking inside and starting with something like our DNA. Where are you from? And functionally, what have you got? And where are you? Does that naturally pull out some of your capabilities? And then behaviorally, are you doing the right things to maximize that? And I can ask those questions of an athlete, and I can ask those questions of an entrepreneur, and I can ask those questions of a dad. And I'll get down from my soapbox here, because the reason that I can ask those questions is because I'm really asking those questions to the athlete that was me, the entrepreneur that is me, and the father that I'm becoming.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people who want to know those things, and don't even know how to necessarily ask the right questions, and don't even know about all this technology that is available to come to know those things much cheaper than you might think, and much more accessible than it has ever been.
I think it's really great to see somebody so mission driven and passionate about what the fucking really is, and the need to chop that sort of stuff up. I think that the full picture is really helpful for people. And to bring it to myself, I actually, as an executive recruiter in the diagnostic space, obviously we come across loads of exciting technologies out there, and lots of stuff that has the opportunity to change people's lives as patients. From my personal life experience, I lost my grandmother to dementia. I know that her later years in her life were really quite poor. And I know that my mother thinks it's genetic. And so I can tell that she's concerned about it, and she would do things if she could to prevent it in the future. But, and that kind of brings us on to accessibility there, because it's a little bit, well, it's a lot smaller as a patient pool to things like oncology. There's less investment in the space. And so the accessibility in terms of information isn't necessarily there as much as it might be on the cancer side of things. And that's not to say that one disease is better or worse than the other. It's more what we would talk about there, where if everybody had the same access to the same level of detail of information, lots of stuff could be changed when it comes to health span and lifespan. And I'm interested to hear what you would define the two as, because you've got this really interesting perspective of business, family, sports person, and the health span must mean something different in each. Well, it must not. I'd love to know what you think. Do they define differently in each pillar?
I would, and I'm making this up as I go. I mean, I've thought a lot about it, but I haven't put hard definitions out. But, I would say something like, for the athlete, it's performance longevity. And, and so when I mentioned the Tom Brady example, there aren't too many quarterbacks that did what he did. I mean, I think he put down like a 40-meter time at 40 that was faster than him when he was 20, which speaks to, efficiencies. I should say it speaks first to the effectiveness of the training and then
Yep.
the efficiencies of doing the right things well. And so that's an example of performance longevity. Now, in the case of Tom Brady, he's got linemen that protect him. But the fact is, he's still out on the field, got 300 guys rushing at him, looking to end him, right? So,
Yeah.
and basically, so your approach to performance longevity there, and let's be clear, like what the goal is. It's like, hey, I might want, a 20-year career and 10 Super Bowl rings. Okay, right? And then you just got to look at that and you say, okay, well, for a Tom Brady in the position of the quarterback, like the way to secure that is, partially there's yourself that you got to take care of. Your all of the, let's say, the mechanics and the skills specific to your position, and how is that synergistic with the team? But then how are you also leveraging the team, like the offensive line, to protect you, right? Like that's got to be in place. I don't care how souped up your arm is or how quick your 40-yard dash is. If you don't have a good team in front of you, your career is over in a split second. Now, if I'm a lineman and I say I want a 20-year, so let's pretend that Tom Brady gets to the other end of that unscathed, right? He can come through that, and he's got a great fitness program. He's got great versatility of movement. He's got great athleticism. He's still like got speed prowess. He like sees the field, like like that paradigm of I can see all the ships sails, and then each sailboat independently. So just incredibly equipped with cognitive capability and resilience, doing all the things nutritionally to upkeep that, all of the mind games and mental work. So that if I look at his, let's say his health span now, that I'm defining more broadly as, well, literally your biological capacity to live a life of quality, a quality of life. Now that becomes obviously much more personal to the individual, is what do I define as quality? And we all are going to have a different standard of what that is, depending on where we're starting with. But I think we can all agree that it is axiomatic. What I mean is there is a good, there is an ideal.
Yep.
We might disagree on what that is, but we won't disagree on the worst, right?
Yeah.
Which might be, lying in a coma and, completely, disengaged, disconnected from what's going on, or being connected and unable to communicate. I think we can agree that that is horrible. So I think health span is something like, having enough of a reservoir for an acceptable period of time, something like beyond the average lifespan, where in that time you have meaningful relationships, right? Because I think relationships are what make the human experience worth anything. So I think our health span is our capacity to be in relationship with those that we love. I define it like something like that. And so now let's go back to Tom Brady. He might achieve performance longevity and health span. Go to the lineman scenario. Well, if your goal is 20 years performance longevity in the NFL and you're an offensive line, that's not looking so good for your health span. And we've seen that with TBI, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's difficult when you talk to the athlete, because I think there's a survey done, I want to say it was in, I can't remember what it was, late 80s, 90s, and they asked athletes, like, if you could take a magic pill and it guaranteed you a gold medal, but, you were going to die young. I think it's like 70% of them were like, yeah, I would take that. Yeah, I'd have to check the sources on that, but I remember coming across that like 20 years ago. So I guess my point is, when our priorities change, and so in order to make the decision, where the athlete's decision complements the entrepreneur's decision, because the entrepreneur is presented with the same thing, same scenario. Like I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who, I mean, their biggest challenge is jumping in between time zones, like for critical meetings and needing to be on. And well, if they drop the ball, like what that means, the stress and the weight of the shoulders of, the entire company on them. It's like, I don't know if you saw that movie, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, something where
Yeah.
they press the button. It's like they do like 10,000 galaxy jumps, right? And interstellar jumps. And they're like, no one's ever done more than two. They do like 10,000. Anyway, that's kind of like what an entrepreneur does. I did that in the beginning. Yeah.
Mm.
And I remember telling my wife when we started dating, it's something like, I don't know where you think this relationship's going because I'm married to my venture. Like, what kind of an asshole says something like that? First of all, I mean, a lot of us do. Right? And we think that's noble, right? And
Yeah.
so I think applying the same principles, with athletes, to the entrepreneurs. Now, yes, it is definitely more like a cognitive burnout that you're worried about.
Yeah, for sure.
But those effects can be much worse than a physical, right? In terms of what it does to your relationships, right? And again, if relationships is the definition of health span, what do you have? Billions of dollars and no one? So for each kind of, group that I work with, the North Star is the same in terms of that health span, but the particulars around it are the things that are important to define as the priority. So then you set up your week, and folks get real kind of attracted to this idea of efficiency and productivity. And I tried that, and I jumped on the whole kind of cognitive medicated pursuit, and yeah, tunnel vision. I got some awesome things done, but I just long term it isn't going to work, and it allows you to kind of put the priority in the closet, or as if it's something to be figured out. It's like, well, if I just get through this checklist, it's like, no, it's like looking at your week and saying, if I did one thing this week, what would it be? And knowing that was a definition of progress or success, and it usually has something to do with the bigger vision, right? What there is in your life that's unfolding. And let's be clear, it is unfolding. And thank goodness for that. It is a bit of a surprise, and that's hard for entrepreneurs to get their heads around. Is like, no, it's objectives and key results, and here's how I know when I'm winning. And it's like, well, yes, but are you aiming at the right thing? So, I might, for example, say, well, I want my top line revenue this year to be $100 million. Like, that's not a North Star. That's a KPI, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, it might be something like, from your perspective, it might be like, I want to ensure 1,000 new relationships, synergistic relationships going forward this year with my talent pool in my companies that I consult for. And so what's a good relationship? Well, good relationship is going to be measured by the KPIs. Well, what are the KPIs? It's going to be something like decreased turnover. That's for sure. It's going to be accelerated growth as defined by, yes, revenue, but before that, some kind of service to the customer. So I think there's, I kind of have jumped into the how to operationalize this, right? Because the temptation is to be, okay, there's all these longevity hacks like Wim Hof breathing and cold tubs and NAD supplementation. And it's like, yeah, but like, why are you doing it? Right. Cause that's the first thing to get clear on. And I'm fortunate. I get to work with, that's really my prerequisite for working with clients is like, can I get behind your why? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The unique perspective that you've added there is adding the mix of relationships to the definition. So all the different people that we've spoken to over the last few months have spoken about lots of the stuff that we've just talked about in terms of sort of physical capabilities, cognitive capabilities, but actually adding relationships in there because it is the most important part of the human experience is certainly unique, and certainly in hearing you say it, I must say I agree. Now, moving things towards the science a little bit, you've talked a little bit about different hacks there. You're obviously on the sort of cutting edge of this side of things. Let's bring this into the the business world first, I'm a business leader. I certainly am challenged by some of the pieces that you've spoken about, the different time zones. We do recruitment from the west coast of the US to Shanghai in Australia. So I literally could work 24 hours a day. And one of the main things that keeps coming up in the different forward, accessible longevity tips is one, sleep, and two, decreased stress as much as you can. Now, those, lack of sleep and stress are part of my daily life and have been part of my daily life at least for the past decade. And so I would love to know, firstly, what your advice would be to somebody like me in that sort of situation. And secondly, is there anything that you think is a simple fix or fixes that anybody could access rather than the different drugs and treatments that might be out there that might be expensive, but just the layman on the street might be able to access by just thinking about it and preparing.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I think that the first thing I would say, and this is a pretty quick and easy one, but simple, but not easy. So you talked about travel, you talked about jumping between time zones, and talked about it's probably business relationships, and there's probably some social aspect of what you're doing.
Yeah,
Fair
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is, like I say, it's simple, but it's not easy. Alcohol. Do not drink alcohol if you're jumping between time zones, right?
And that's definitely something that is repeated throughout. And you can imagine,
Yeah.
whether you're traveling somewhere physically and you're on a plane and they're offering you a glass of wine or whatever it might be, or
Yeah.
I'm obviously working from home office today. If I was working late at night, it's sort of 10:30 and I feel like I need a glass of something to help me to switch off so that I can actually go to sleep. And
Yeah.
actually, I think in what you're saying and what I'm reading is that actually that's detrimental more than being helpful. That's your point. It's quite difficult to do.
Right. So I remember this one client that I worked with, and I won't mention his name, but he's manages $1 billion top line revenues for a prevalent company, and he was like really like, we're going for it, man. Like I was working with him because he was like, my goal is to perform as good or better as I am now at age, say 50, mid 50s, now 60, until I'm 80, 90. And I was like, that's a goal. I was like, I can get behind that. Like at first he engaged me. He's like, can you manage all my personal health data? I was like, all my heart, no, that's not what I do. I get behind impossible goal. I get behind impossible goals. And he's like, okay, well, this is my impossible goal. And I was like, oh yeah, let's do that. And let's make it like 120. Like, let's go big. And so he was all in everything or so, he thought. It's like, yeah, no, I eat tuna and salads. It's like, so you eat mercury, basically. You're killing your brain, right? So it's like we ascribe to these things that are like, oh yeah, low glycemic index, high lean protein, but it's like, yeah, but poison, And then the other thing was, oh, I'm cutting out all alcohol, and I'm like, well, how much do you drink? It's like, oh, like a glass of wine twice a week. I was like, okay, do you do that alone? It's like, no, actually, it's with my wife or with my really close friends. And it's like, and what happens in those moments? Well, we have really deep. Okay, so look. The alcoholic effect is definitely being offset by the social, right?
Mm.
We talk about the relationship side. So it's like, in this instance, cutting alcohol is not a bad thing. So it isn't like we can't tyrannize ourselves because that's just boring, right?
Yeah.
And if there's no reason to live, forget it. But something like travel, it's just so painfully obvious. I'll tell you another story with I worked with this contingent of NHL hockey players. I'd work with them basically in their off season to help them put back the pieces after the Stanley Cup final and get ready to do it all again. And I had one athlete who had a wedding that he went to, and anyway, came back from the wedding, and he was very disenchanted with the results that he was getting in the program for all the work that he'd been putting in it at the phase of the program we were in. And I was like, okay, well, why are you getting these results and everybody else is getting good results? He was like, what about that wedding you went to? Right? He's like, I only had 6 drinks. Right? And I was like, okay, how often do you normally drink? Well, not very often. Okay, and then you had 6 drinks. Okay, let's pull up some literature. Then I pulled up this literature, which basically shows every drink is basically 1 day of decreased performance. So you have 6 drinks, you're going to be spending 6 days detoxing, especially if you don't do it regularly, because there is physiology under that, right? Like in your cells,
Yeah.
there's this thing called the endoplasmic reticulum, and that's your detox zone. And so if you're not working out the detox
Yeah.
muscle, it's like, here's why your performance is shit. But it was only 6, and my buddies had 24. It's like, are they trying to
They
win the
used to.
Stanley Cup? Right?
Yeah.
So you gotta ask yourself as the entrepreneur is like, well, what can I do to not socially isolate myself, but not to handicap myself personally? And let me ask you this, Josh, how old are you right now?
33.
33, and you're with your first child now, right?
Yeah. First child. Yeah.
You get away with this between your 20s and 30s. It actually not really, because I'm talking to these athletes. So it's like, if you're operating at the tip of the spear, they're in their 20s and 30s, and their performance has reduced significantly, 20 to 30%, right?
Yeah.
You still look good and everything, but you're garbage because your fuel is, and so, it says, okay, but this is part of the process. It's like, fine, if this is part of the process, then we got to zoom out and we got to look at what the consequences are, both short and long term. And it's like, you're allowed to do that maybe twice a year, but you're not going to do it every month. So it's about it's keeping your powder dry, So because there is a social component of it. There's a nice piece in Elon Musk's book where he goes and does business with the Russians and that it's like all vodka as part of that process. And by the way, he never ended up doing business with them. But anyway, so what I would do as a fix, I learned this. Obviously, hydration is massive, right? Especially if you're flying, right? Like, get compression socks, get up, be that weird guy that's getting up hopefully at least every hour, going to the bathroom, like touch your toes, reach, like you got to get the lymphatic drainage going, because your lymph system, that's where all the inflammation gets kind of pooled, is only mobilized through movement. It's not like your circulatory system. So you got to move. You got to have a movement protocol before, during, and after. So whatever it is, like, I don't advocate to like yoga or CrossFit, but I do advocate to what those things do. And they give you a flush, right? They give you a lymphatic flush, right? That's where cold plunges are great. That's where, as soon as you land, you can get to a park, take off your shoes and ground yourself and connect, right? So those are like some behavioral things that you do. But besides that, the first thing that I would do when I would land is I would go to the grocery store and I would buy apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, and cayenne pepper, right? And that's what I drink. I give myself a shot of that every morning, every evening, plus the hydration protocol. And, and then more than that. So if you get the first principles, like, at least please don't drink on the first day. It's like, can we make a deal there? Right. like tell the bartender, like, hey, when I order my drink, like, make it a Shirley Temple kind of thing. Like, there are ways where you don't have to be a social outcast and you can kind of trick the system and not burn yourself out. Yeah. And then there's the other things that you might support you. So, if, for example, you're going from LA to London, well, sleep earlier, take melatonin in the morning a few days before the trip. Going from, say, New York to LA, delay sleep and get evening light exposure to help you adjust, right? So you want to start to think about, where you're coming from and where you're going to be and how you want to feel there. And then you actually start the jet lag training protocol a couple of days before. And then there are like little supplement packs that you can, put together as well. Like things like, you've probably heard all these things, right? Like the melatonin, magnesium glycate, L-theanine, ashwagandha, or rhodiola. Is another one. So these are adaptogens that kind of help. And then using caffeine really only for strategic use, right? So in the morning in the new time zone, for example, that's going to help you shift and avoid that kind of after 2 p.m. local time crash. So like I've given you all those things, but it's got to be like organized into like an astronaut pack, right?
Yeah. It's got to be easy as well. You got to like easy in that I need to not be able to think. I need to be able to just be like this, and this is what I need to do. Just a quick tangential story for you. So I did my first Ironman last year. Did all this training. only half an Ironman, or as they like to call it in my office, a baby Ironman.
Well,
Even though it's still a pretty long way. I did all this training for maybe like 3 or 4 months. Into the day of the event, my wife and I had flown over to Sweden because that's where I was doing it, and it just so happened that England were playing in a soccer game the night before the event. Much to my coach's dismay, I ended up having not just one beer, but a few beers the night before the race. And so you can imagine the fueling that was then going into the next day made that the event was much more difficult than I was expecting it to be. I mean, it was always going to be difficult, but like you can imagine going to bed early and having a good night's steak and a glass of water and some electrolytes versus the poison that I put in my body instead. As an alternative. Now, you've started to talk about supplements, and I do want to take things to that part of the story, which is the science and obviously the area that I'm working in. So we have two different segments that we work in. One is the diagnostics businesses that will help you understand how your body is aging in whatever way they test on it, and then the other area, which tends to be the slightly sexier area, which is the drugs or the supplements that you can take to try and reverse that without you actually having to do it. And I had a great conversation with somebody before where for some reason or other, there's something in the human psyche that would much prefer to pay lots of money for something that's a quick, easy fix versus do something that's free. Like, I don't know, drink water instead of alcohol, which is obviously not free, but comparatively speaking, something in the human psyche that means that we go towards the pill versus going towards the behavioral response, because the behavioral response might take longer. Anyway, all of that to say, is there anything, we're not here to sell different people's drugs or anything like that, but is there any particular area that you would think that people are developing science that is actually showing some really promising results in terms of actually helping people elongate their health span?
Yeah. So let's see. So first, I just want to highlight kind of the kind of the point of that triathlon story there, which is really interesting. This is a well-known story, like the Apollo astronauts, right? Like how was it that they prepared for and could do what they did? And the key to bring this back to was being prepared to be unprepared. And how are they prepared to be unprepared as well? They practice systematizing everything that was in their control, so they didn't have to think about it, so they could set it and forget it. So whether that was training and simulation, right? So again, simulators, checklists, mission specific rehearsals, right? Mental conditioning, calm under pressure, visualization, discipline, right? Disciple to the goal, basically what that is.
Yeah.
The physical preparation, right? So strict health protocols, fitness and diet, body weight, body physiological control, et cetera. And don't forget the team cohesion and all of that. So, and then it is the physical, the philosophical, acceptance to this thing. And so I think it is paramount to have your house in order.
Yeah.
And another way of saying that is you can go ahead and trim the branches all you like, but until you get to the root issue, you're just gonna keep spending money on supplements that, frankly, are in my mind no better than drugs if they're just treating the symptom. So
yeah.
So I can't point to like one supplement, right, where it's like, oh, this is what you absolutely must take. But like, let me show you something here. Give me 2 seconds. You still hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay. And I'm just going on a check here. So, well, I won't bring everything, but so I'm just running downstairs, and for folks who are listening, and I'm grabbing, because I'm on a spaceship, right? I have people to serve. So I have to be my best. So here's an example of what I do, and I would never recommend what I do for other people. So this is my astronaut pack, right? So for folks who are watching, I've got one of those like pill kits that 80-year-olds use, and each of these is one day, and I have
Yep.
four capsules or four sections that have a specific combination of pills that I put together. Now, I'm unbelievably blessed because, as I said, I had the good fortune to research and study what I did in the world of molecular chemistry and microbiology, biochemistry. So I understand those principles. But better than that, I have a wife who is a holistic nutritionist. So she worked for supplement companies. So it's not just what supplement, but it's like what brands make it. And I can't point to who those are because she manages that. And they're changing like every month, right? Because new information comes out and, folks are cutting quality for efficiency all the time. And so we're always trying to stay on top of that. So yeah, so like this day, for example, for me, I've got methionine in the morning, and I've got one of those MTHFR gene variants that kind of keeps that in check. I've got a B complex as well. I've got the Shilajit, which is a detoxifier, if you will. I've got that rhodiola, and I've got magnesium, bisglycinate, and so that's my Monday. And each of the days are mostly the same. I'm just saying they're 85% the same, but then there'll be minor changes based on what I've got planned for the day. And I generally structure my week in a certain way so that it is predictable. I can set it and forget it.
Yes.
I operate on a Sunday to Saturday schedule. And each of those days is set up in a particular way that complements what I'm trying to achieve, not just in the week, but the month, the year, the quarter, the year, 4 years out. I like to operate on the Olympic cycle because anyway. And then in parallel to that, I've got my hydration, and this has like a multivitamin powder complex based on my DNA profile. But then also in the morning, I'll sub in so I'll have like 4 of these in the day. In the morning will be creatine, middle of the day will be BCAAs, late in the day will be MSM, and at the end of the day will be glutamine. And it's not forever, it's just forever for now. That's my current stack, but my stack changes. So the short answer to your question, what are the, kind of leading supplements? It's like, it's not one, it's a stack, and it's a stack that's based on a system that is you. And the system is your biology, your psychology, and your goals, right? And so, I would be doing you a disservice if I said, well, Josh, just go home and take melatonin after your jet lag. So it could be that easy, but I don't know until I understand you as the solar system, because you add a new variable, it's like adding a new planet. And we'll look what happens when the moon cycles, right? The tides go in, the tides go out, gravity's real. And when people are operating at the tip of the spear, I don't like to mess around because that'll cost you the Olympic final, or that'll cost you closing that investment deal, et cetera. So what I do is I work with entrepreneurs to build and co-create the thing with them so that they can set it and forget it. And they know it starts with your DNA. It's based on you. I am working towards this, personal dashboard. That's the thing I call Iris Infinity, because it's like everybody's eye is different, just like everybody's eye is different. And there's an infinite number of things that you might become. So choose wisely, aim at that thing, and then let's support you in every way, shape, form possible.
Super interesting. I know that this conversation could go on for a long time, but I know that I also have got another meeting that I need to go to. Now, I do have at least 2 more questions I want to ask you, sir, and we do have time for them as long as you do.
I do.
You've kind of started to talk about this anyway, and it's quite clear in your behavior that it's having some impact on your own relationship with your own biology. But how has the coaching that you're doing with the founders, the athletes, the new dads like you and I, how has that changed your relationship to your own biology?
Oh man, what a great question, right? It's like I get on a session with an athlete or an entrepreneur or a dad, and I mean, what's great is I've developed this, persona of a corner man.
Yep.
I don't know, like you remember Rocky, but like Mickey and Rocky or whoever your corner man is, you come out to your corner man and you're like, I'm getting killed out there. What the hell am I doing wrong, right? And your corner man kind of acts as like a mirror, right? And it's like, dude, every time you load up to throw your overhand right, you're foreshadowing and you're dropping your right, and you're taking a left hook on the chin, and that's what's happening. So helpful that I used to be a boxer as well. So I do love that analogy is like, so you got a fighter, he's in the arena. And, the great thing is I'm in my own arena at the same time. And I've been in some pretty severe arenas, from athletics to business to personally. And so when I talk to any of the different archetypes that I'm working with, so, let's say athletes, entrepreneurs, and dads, generally speaking, what they describe is something that I can relate to. And so I like the jet lag example, or, with the athletes is wanting to return to play before I'm ready.
Yeah.
And hurting myself more. And as a dad, not understanding the emotional plasticity and reformation that actually happens that can happen and is happening in the adult mind as the child moves through their own development, of that emotional understanding or intelligence. And so the first thing is I can empathize, right?
Mm.
Like and that's the reason why I choose to serve those who I do, is because I can't help moms. The hell do I know about being a mom, right? Like I want to be a way better husband to my wife, and I want to help moms in that way. But also I'm like, I know I'm failing every day. And so, I'm glad I got a good partner who can point out my blind spots. So the first thing is, okay, well, how does it help me with my biology? I think it actually helps me remember some of the mistakes I'd made before and not repeat them, right?
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get sucked back into old habits. I use a sprinting
Totally.
analogy is great for this, right? Like sprinting is once you put in your acceleration and you achieve maximum velocity, that basically falls off at 60 meters. Okay, Usain Bolt might be able to hold it to 80, but the fact is you're done. And what'll happen sometimes is others will accelerate longer and start to creep up on you at the end. And even though you've got enough to head out and finish first, you fall into the paradigm, I should try to reaccelerate. And so the only thing that you can do is tighten up the muscles that are actually in opposition to the ones that you actually need to sprint. So I think that coaching reminds me to be patient, right? And you want to talk about biology, it takes time. Yeah, I can water the grass, but when the seeds actually sprout, that's not up to me. So, so I think it and there's a certain reverence to that. So I would say working with clients helps me to revere this, miracle of biology.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we haven't even spoken about the podcast that you host, but I know you sent me an episode that I need to watch. It's called The DNA of Things. I'm right on there, and it's a thing about parenthood that you sort of looked at. Anyway, what I would love to ask you is, because I'm sure watching this video, and if people have watched all the way through to here, we obviously thank them for staying with us. But there's obviously going to be professionals watching the video. There's no doubt going to be fathers watching the video. There might even be some sports men and women. I know there are in my LinkedIn network where this will be posted. I don't normally do this, but if they wanted to access you in some sort of way, if they wanted some advice, or whether they wanted to access one of the episodes that you've shared that might be helpful for them in their own personal situation, whether it's directly impactful to them, or it might just help them understand that people are experiencing something similar. What's the best way for people to reach you and learn more about the advice and that you give?
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing up the podcast. So the podcast is called DNA of Things. It's on all major platforms. And I'll be honest with you, those are just organic conversations with people who I think are cool. And they help me shape ideas. They help me shape ideas around performance and entrepreneurship and fatherhood. And it's just every episode for me is like reading 10,000 books. So I think there's something there for everybody as it relates to those topics that I mentioned. It is, there are conversations, it's exploratory. I am working on a specific subset of series, right? Like, so, the athlete series, the entrepreneur series, the the fatherhood series. So those will be, much more practical. So, stay tuned for that. I'm, working on those, thinking about more of like a 2026 launch. So that'll be coming. But in the meantime, there's, like I said, there's something there for everybody. The episode I'm launching today is, Cam Moline, who is like a ex-actor turned tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, who son has autism, and he saw the healthcare system operating amazingly when he was part of this UCL trials group, fell apart, and he's like, what the hell happened? And so, the communication broke down. So he's built a solution, to facilitate communication. So like, that's just today for an example. And I'm tracking towards my 100th episode. There's lots of stuff there. And then in terms of like contacting me personally, if folks are interested, either as athletes, or as entrepreneurs, or as heads of family, they can simply email me at Jeremy. So that's jeremy@irisinfinity.com. That's the best way to get in touch with me. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there, Jeremy Koenig. But email is going to be the best way to get me.
Awesome. And I promised I would land on an interesting question. What I would love to know from you, Jeremy, is if you were to spend, say you were stuck in an elevator with somebody and you had to talk about the topic of longevity for an hour, who would you nominate to be in this with you?
To listen, or I would be talking to them to learn from, maybe.
Yeah, up to you. You're stuck with them, so it's up to you whether you're learning or you're adding to the conversation or what you want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to have somebody like I like to be the dumbest one in the room. So now, unfortunately, Stephen Jay Gould is no longer with us. So he's what I would nominate an AI of him. Let's say Stephen Jay Gould is an incredible evolutionary biologist, polymath, critical thinker. Who would I be stuck in an elevator with? God, you hit me with that one. And they have to be alive, right? That's probably it.
It has to be a prerequisite. I think so.
Okay. Yeah. Gosh, this is gonna sound so cheesy, man. Tony Robbins. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying it, and I got to give you like a 2-second backstory if that's okay.
Oh, dude. Yeah, please.
Okay, so my wife was starting her business up when we first met, just coaching women in business, and she was getting a Tony Robbins coach, and I was like, oh man, that guy is so this and that, and I was just so ready to dismiss it, but I really liked Kristen, so I was like, oh, well, let me give this a chance, and I watched something on YouTube where he was presenting to a bunch of like Stanford academics. And I saw that for a moment he got like uncomfortable. And, but then he, as far as I can tell, used the very principles that he teaches to just recenter his state. And he masterfully gave. And so I saw it as like, oh, he's human and he uses what he sells. And the really cool thing that I like about him is he's a master of interdependence. And I think that's where we want to head to, right? It's like, once you master yourself, right, with integrity, live with integrity, and you can harmonize across different spheres of your lives, yourself, leadership, relationship with others, and organizationally. So you got integrity, harmony, then interdependence. Like, how can I bring that and synergize? And I think he's a master at synergy. He's not an expert at anything per se, other than himself. But he has taught others how to do that. And then he learns from them by humbling himself. And so I'd say, hey man, like, how does a guy who's like 8 feet tall and just a presence and have all this following still offer up this humility? Yeah, that's what I want to talk about. Yeah. And talk about longevity. I mean, he's embodying it, at least up to today. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, thank you. Thank you so much for all the insights today. And I know we could have kept this conversation going. And I'm really looking forward to dialing in and listening to some of these episodes on the DNA of things. And personally, obviously looking forward to continuing to connect with you and discuss all sorts of different topics over the weeks, months, and even years to come.
Amazing. I look forward to that, Josh. Thank you for everything that you're doing, the service that you're providing. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today.
All right, that's a wrap. We covered the performance longevity, Healthspan defined through relationships, and why checklists beat heroics when life gets complex, especially across time zones, careers, and parenthood. So if one idea sticks, make it this: systematize what's controllable so you're prepared to be unprepared. For more conversations like this, please do subscribe to the DNA of Things on your favorite platform and share the episode with someone who'd benefit. If you're an athlete, founder, or parent interested in a personalized first principles approach, feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn, email me directly, jeremy@irisinfinity.com. And a big thanks to Josh and the crew at JB Andrews team for steering today's conversation. Looking forward to exploring more together soon.